Hi everybody, it's Gabrielle and welcome back to my channel. As some of you guys know, my husband and I have been on a wild journey these past few months. We were pregnant with twin girls and they came extremely early. I delivered my daughters Noah and Selahs at 26 weeks and 3 days. The past few months have been a whirlwind of just the craziest health reports, health scares, the most miraculous moves of God, incredible healings, and just a very wild, crazy season. I did a Q&A on my Instagram last week asking if anybody had questions about our NICU journey and what these past few months have looked like in regards to our faith, what it's been like for me postpartum, kind of where Noah and Selahs are at right now. And as I was answering the questions, I was just kind of realizing that these questions were going to be really hard to answer in their entirety on an Instagram story. So I figured I would do a compilation and just kind of answer a lot of the questions on a video. So I'm just going to jump right into it. And for anybody who maybe isn't as familiar with our story, you can go ahead and check out my Instagram at Gabriele Shaquin, and you can check out all of the updates on the girls, where their journey started, what it's been like between now and then. They are now 44 weeks, so they were born at 26. So this has kind of been like a 3.5, 4 month long process where you can go and read all about their story there. But I will go ahead and get started. So one of the first questions was, what was Noah and Selahs' birth weight? This was wild, and this is probably like one of my hardest things like to talk about now. Noah and Selahs were, like I said, born 3 months early. So Noah was just 1 pound and 12 ounces big, and Selahs was 2 pounds 1 ounce. If you were looking at the girls, they were basically the size of like from the bottom of this hand to the top of this hand. They were extremely tiny, and I don't have a lot of pictures of them at that time. I don't feel like I will ever share them for some reason. Like, it just seems very vulnerable to share kind of what they looked like at that time. It was just very kind of like a traumatizing thing to see. In the moment, I didn't realize the gravity of how small they were. But now as I look back, it breaks my heart to look at them. So that kind of gives an idea of how big they were though. Do you guys want more kids in the future? Yes. I know it's kind of like crazy to say that now, knowing just like our journey starting off parenthood has been very hard and very difficult and scary in a lot of ways, but also I always thought I wanted like 3 or 4 kids, but after having Noah and Selahs, I've just been blown away at how much I love them, and it makes me want like 12 of them. So definitely want as many kids as the Lord will allow, and we'll be like praying specifically just that I don't experience like an early labor like that again. Do you have Noah and Selahs' discharge date yet, or does it just depend? So Noah and Selahs, they are still in the hospital. They are 44 weeks on Wednesday, so they are basically a month over their due date. Typically, when you are in the NICU, they always said a really good date to aim for would be their due date, which would have been January 25th. We're about a month out from that. The girls both had really hard respiratory issues. Basically, it's called, I know I'm going to say this incorrectly, but basically it's called BPD. I don't know the like terminology for it, but it's essentially where just the lungs are extremely underdeveloped, and everything develops slower out of the womb. So the girls have had to have a little bit of a longer stay in order for their lungs to develop. However, Selahs is currently off of all of her oxygen support, and Noah will hopefully be getting off everything on Tuesday, which would just be like the biggest dream come true. And basically all they're learning and like waiting on right now is them learning how to eat. I personally have chosen to not take them home on a feeding tube. I know that a lot of you have messaged and been really encouraging who have had an experience in NICU like me where you can take them home on a feeding tube, and that is true. And while that would be beautiful to have them home, there's just like something mentally like for me where when we leave, I just want that chapter to be closed. It's kind of hard to explain, but I just want to see my girls whole and like at home without any cords or things on their face. When they're here, I just want it to be done. And I know that can be kind of hard to explain, but yes, they could technically come home a little bit sooner, but we're choosing to wait for them to learn how to feed so they can be off of all of their tubes and contraptions so that when they come home, they're just like good to go. Let's see. Did you have a C-section or vaginal birth? I had a vaginal birth, which I was very thankful for. And I did not have the epidural. So the girls, I basically just went into labor so quickly that by the time I arrived at the hospital, I was already dilated to 6, almost 7 centimeters inches, sorry. Is that correct? I don't even know which one it is. But I was able to deliver the girls when I was dilated to like a 7.5, like almost like basically an 8. They came so quickly and they both were in the position where they were head down that like my doctors there at this like random hospital, I was in also, side note, I'll have to get into that, but I delivered 3.5 hours away from home. I was on vacation for like a girls retreat with my church. But the girls were in like the right position to be born vaginally, and I was dilating so quickly that there was like no need for a C-section. I really did not want to have the epidural going into it. I know not everybody's like this, but I have always just had like a horrible fear of needles. I hate them so much, and honestly, like the idea of like a really big needle going in my back just sounded way worse than like just delivering a baby, which is kind of, but I'm also just like, I always like to take a naturalist and holistic approach to my health in general. I really am like a naturalist at heart, so I really did not want to be on like any kind of drugs or additional supplements if I didn't have to. How are you doing emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? Thank you for asking. It's been, I've been really fortunate to have like a lot of people reach out and check in on how I'm doing. Obviously, my journey into motherhood has been like extremely traumatic and difficult, and just like really shocking in a lot of ways, and not how people typically envision starting parenthood. But overall, I genuinely feel like I have had as joyous as a postpartum experience as I possibly could have given our circumstances, between like just having incredible community, like knowing that I like have the Lord, and the Lord has been so faithful, just in all that he's done for the girls, but also just knowing that, like I've had him to lean on with scripture, and just being able to like encounter his presence, knowing that even on our worst days or when we've gotten really bad reports, like I wasn't hopeless. I was able to pray, and I did know that I had God to help me. For those who don't know, Noah, when she was born, had a lot of health complications. So she had a hole in her lung, a hole in her heart, a hole in her intestine, a hole in her bladder, and then she had a grade 3 brain bleed. And yeah, as you guys know, like I had said, she was only about 1 pound and 12 ounces. So it was really wild. We also were separated at the hospital when my daughter had gotten the hole in her intestine. She had to be transported to a different hospital in Michigan. We originally were in South Bend, Indiana, and we had to leave our other daughter behind because U of M was at 100% capacity. So my experience with motherhood started extremely early, and it also came with having 2 children in separate states and one daughter having extreme health complications. God has faithfully healed all of her organs and has been doing incredible. We have just seen God do leaps and bounds in her life, and she's honestly just functioning so perfectly and so well right now, and we're just so thankful for that. I feel like that might be like probably the 2 things that have allowed me to be in a healthy place have just been prayer and having a thankful heart. Like, I am not naive to the fact that some parents never get to take their babies home, or some parents were in there before me and they're leaving after me, and their children have a lot of crazier complications. And that's even crazy for me to think, because I know Noah's complications were so wild, but ours isn't the only story that looks like that. There's parents who have been through the unthinkable in different ways. And so overall, I just feel very thankful for all that God has done, and healing Noah, and sustaining their lives, and doing the miraculous. And it's just been an incredible experience. So I just feel very thankful. I do feel at peace. I definitely am excited to come home, and I'm itching to be at home with them. And I definitely have really hard days where I wish things were different. But overall, like, I feel like really thankful for all of our community, all the things that God has done, and just the ways that he has shown up and sustained Dylan and I. Let's see. What caused you to go into early labor? So this is kind of like the craziest, like, elephant in the room in terms of, like, how does this happen? Like, how can this be prevented? And unfortunately, like, we don't really know why this happened. I think most people don't. Multiples in pregnancy, like anytime someone has a twin pregnancy, it's always at a higher risk. Like, people always know, like, twins typically deliver earlier. But I had the most incredible, wonderful, beautiful pregnancy leading up to this. It was healthy. There was no complications. When I went into my anatomy scan, we did see that my cervix was extremely thin compared to most women at that stage in pregnancy. So, for example, at 24 weeks, I think the typical cervix length is 5 to 6 inches. And mine was 1.3. So I was measuring as though it was 35 weeks. However, my doctor had told me there's some women who just naturally have a smaller cervix, and that, that doesn't necessarily mean that I would deliver early. It just meant that, like, it was a higher possibility. But he was really reassuring. And I think at the time, looking back, Dylan and I both agree, like, we did not understand the severity of what he was saying, which also might have just been the Lord, like, keeping us, like, in a healthy place mentally and just at peace. But when he had told us that I was measuring further along, it just felt like he kept really trying to reassure us, like, you know, some people do measure at a shorter cervix length and never deliver earlier. So I think I just kind of kept taking that instead of kind of anticipating, like, it delivering earlier was a really strong possibility. How did you keep your faith so strong through this? That is a good question. I feel like how do I word this? I've been following the Lord for about 6 years now, a little bit longer. And throughout those 6 years, I really have tried to establish as strong of a lifestyle. I don't even know if I would call it a lifestyle. Like, my life, I've tried to implement as much and apply as much of the Bible and the gospel that I could in my life. So for years, I have been trying to establish applying the word, getting closer to Jesus, being around community, being in his word, being in prayer. And I started to encounter God's character and not just read about it. I was seeing God as deliverer and redeemer and faithful and father and provider and all these other ways way before, like, this huge storm in our life. I believe I just had really gotten to not just learn about who God was, but experience him for myself in other ways leading up to this. But by the time I had a horrible season like this, a very difficult season like this, I had already encountered his character and not just read about it or heard other people's experience about it. I was really doing what I could to seek out the kingdom and seek out God in my own life. And not that I was perfect by any means, but I feel like I was putting forth the effort that I could in order to build a strong relationship with Jesus, so that when something like this came, I already knew who he was, and I had already encountered his character, and I already knew that he was true and he was good, and everything that the word said about him was who he was. And I think that's what allowed me to have a strong faith, was being like, God, I've encountered you in all these other ways before, but would you do it for me now? And I think that was something I had to have settled, was my need for Christ was just as great as it, like then before this craziness with the girls, as it was now. I always needed a savior. I always needed God to redeem my life. I need God on a daily basis. I need God to wake up in the morning. I need God in any and every circumstance of my life. And I was, through inviting him in the day-to-day circumstances, when it came to something this big, like I had already had trust in who he was, that I did believe, regardless of what was going to happen with the girls, that he was good and he could help me. And I also had it settled in my soul, regardless of what happened, I'm never leaving the faith. Like, my life was, my faith and my love for God was not determined by my circumstances, but it was determined by what he did for me on the cross. That kind of gave me the strength, I think, just having my soul settled that like I was going to love Jesus for the rest of my life, that no matter what happened, I did trust that like God was going to use it for his good. And that doesn't mean it was easy. Those were the most difficult, ugly, darkest days of my life. Like, if I ever thought I knew what sorrow and grief was before this season of my life, I didn't. Like, I truly did not. My worst day before this season with the girls seemed like a piece of cake compared to what we were encountering now. So it wasn't easy, but yeah, I think you can have strong faith through the trials by first getting to know him when all things are going well, that you know that he is faithful and he is who he says he is, to get you through the storm when it does come. I hope that kind of makes sense. How did you pick out Noah and Selahs' names? This is some of my favorite stories to tell. I always knew I wanted to name my first daughter Noah. I was at a Propel conference like 4 or 5 years ago when I had heard a woman share the story. It's a very short story in the book of Numbers. The daughters of Zephaland, I think I'm saying that correctly, but basically it was this concept that during that time, only sons could receive the inheritance from their fathers. Daughters were not given any inheritance. And basically there was a ruler or a man with a lot of authority and a lot of riches and wealth who had 5 daughters. And when he passed, the inheritance was not going to go to the girls. And basically the 5 daughters like went before Moses and to make a request unto the Lord to see if they could be the first ever daughters that received the inheritance. And one of the daughters' name was Noah. And basically the Lord had said yes, and that they were right. And not only did they receive their father's inheritance, but every daughter after them then received an inheritance from their parents as well. And I think it was just this concept of like, God said yes because they had the faith to ask what nobody had ever asked before. And I think that was like a really, like, this just spoke so profoundly to me, because I was like, wow, like, God is just so moved by our faith, and they were willing to ask what nobody else was. And that also was just pricking my heart, like, wow, like, there must be so much that God would be willing to say yes to, but nobody ever asked. And that was like, when I had heard about this daughter and one of them being named Noah, I was like, I want to name my daughter Noah, and just kind of like that to set the tone of her life, that she would be willing to ask what nobody else would be willing to ask. And or just always feeling comfortable to ask God for the unthinkable, which obviously she has lived out her name from the moment she's been born, because we have had to ask for incredible healing and intervention from the Lord, and God has so faithfully said yes to everything. Oh, it makes me want to cry. Oh. Sorry. Wow. Yeah, God has said yes, and he didn't have to, and I'm not naive to the fact that that isn't everyone's story. And when this was all happening, I remember thinking, like, why, like, God, why does everything keep getting, like, why does everything keep getting worse? Like, her, like, it was just one thing after another, and it just seemed like it was constant and it wouldn't stop. But now I'm like looking back and I'm like, I think it was God's way of saying, like, because when I healed everything, like, people know it wasn't just a coincidence. Like, I am healer and I do have authority over everything. And I think her name was just, Dill and I had to immediately exercise like what it looked like to ask what nobody had ever asked for before. And we were asking for healing and things that these doctors had never seen, and many doctors had never seen a hole in the bladder, and it was healed. And many doctors have to intervene on the hole in the intestine surgically, and they didn't have to. It healed on its own. And as of right now, like, Noah has given no indication of any kind of permanent damage as of right now. We know we have to like monitor her for just making sure she meets her milestones. But that is Noah's name. And then we found out we were having 2 girls, and I really wanted it to, on a lighter note, I really liked how names sounded, like Noah, and I wanted another 2-syllable name. And Dylan was like, what about Selah? And we knew it like meant to praise God. And I was like, okay, like, let me think about it. And Dylan and I had gone to a conference, and I was praying that weekend. I was like, Lord, like, what's her name? Like, what is Noah's sister's name? Like, what should we name her? And I just kept hearing like Noah and Selahs, Noah and Selahs. And I was like, okay, like, that's it. Like, we're going to name her Selah. And I told Dylan at the end of this worship session at the conference, I was like, I think her name is supposed to be Selah. And he's like, okay, like, let's do it. Like, we're naming her Selah. So we get on this flight from Detroit to go, or sorry, we get on this flight from Nashville to go back to Detroit. And we are on this like 500-600 person flight. Like, there's hundreds of people on this flight. And we get sat all the way in the back next to this family. And it was this mom and dad with their baby girl. And they were like, Selah, like, holding this little baby. And Dylan and I were like, oh my gosh, like, okay, that's her name. Like, God had given beautiful confirmation. So yes, I think this will be my, this will be the last question. Are that girls identical or fraternal? So we don't know yet. I will be doing like a cotton swab mouth test when the girls get home. My pregnancy, I think I'm saying this correctly, I think it was a mono-di-di pregnancy, which meant the girls had 2 sacs and 2 placentas. So that would mean there was a 70% chance likelihood that they were fraternal and 30% chance likelihood that they were identical. It's possible the girls are identical, but I feel like I very distinctly can tell them apart. I don't know if that's just because I'm their mom, but I feel like Selah is just like a spitting image of Dylan. Like, it's hilarious. I'm like, how can a 6'3" grown man like look like a little baby girl? Like, I don't even know. But and I feel like Noah kind of favors me more and has a little bit more of like my features, but their profiles like look identical. So I don't know. We'll have to look into that, but I will definitely share when we get those results once the girls are home. But yeah, if you made it this far, thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you guys for just being so intrigued in Noah and Selah's story. And if you have ever prayed for Noah and Selahs, I just have to like personally thank you. I wish I could like give you a hug in person and just tell you what every encouraging DM and like miraculous story and prayer and like support, like sending Dill and I meals, like how much it has meant to us. I will never be able to thank everyone, and I will never be able to pay back. I just feel so indebted, and just the thank you is just from like the bottom of my heart, and I just need you to know that your prayers changed everything. I do believe like prayer does change everything, and I know that it is the only reason that Noah is not just alive but is whole. And so yeah, just thank you so much for everybody who's been so intrigued, who's wanted to participate, who's wanted to follow along. And I'm definitely so excited to give more updates as the girls are home. And I did only get to go through a few questions, so I might have to go through a Q&A again, and I'm definitely going to be posting my birth story soon, because that was like also the most miraculous, beautiful move of God that I'm really excited to share. So so yeah, so excited. I can't wait to update everybody when the girls get home. But thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon.